Leadership Conversations Zoomcast. My name is Karen Conley, and on behalf of Lead Like Jesus, I am so glad that you are joining not only myself today, but an incredible guest that you can probably see if you have an opportunity to watch this, Dr. Babb. Dr. Babb, thank you so much for joining us for this Zoomcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. Glad to be able to do it finally.
Well, it is. If you listen to any of our podcasts and now Zoomcasts, you might know that I think every time the producers must think Karen really doesn't spend a lot of time on the formal bios and the formal introductions. It's not necessarily my favorite part, and usually because my guests would prefer for me not to talk about all of their accolades. But Dr. Babb, did want to just make sure that before we started our conversation, that our viewers had an opportunity to know really just the breadth and the depth of wisdom that you're going to bring to this call. So bear with me for just a minute. But for those of you who don't know Dr. Babb, you're in for a great treat. He has had a long career, a distinguished career as both an educator and an entrepreneur. So from the business side of things, he has sold and co-founded businesses in the healthcare sector, in student financial services, renewable energy. As I started looking at this, Dr. Babb, I was like, what have you not done? But not only did you have your success in the corporate world and in the business world, but you also have had a career as a professor at the University of Richmond. And in your time there, you were professor and chairman of marketing at the Robbins School of Business, as well as being recognized as the University Distinguished Teaching Award recipient. And then, now this part, Dr. Babb, I did not know, you were also recently inducted into the University of Richmond Athletic Hall of Fame. So you have covered the bases with both athletics, academics, and entrepreneurialism. So thank you for joining us today and bringing your wisdom to our call.
Well, thank you for reading that and not asking me to do it myself or explain it.
Yeah, I guess that is the lesser of the two evils, right? Well, on this first podcast, what I'd love to do, as I started looking at all of the different places that you have been able to impact, I thought maybe we would have the opportunity to really talk about your role as a professor and teaching marketing. So maybe, if you don't mind, just tell us what made you decide to start teaching.
That can be a very short or very long answer because I'm not sure I ever really decided that. I get this question. I did not grow up thinking that I was going to be a teacher. I wasn't a great student. I went to university basically to play sports. When I found out I wasn't that good, I decided maybe I should study some. So I get through undergraduate, but then when I was in my graduate program, I got I guess maybe a two-handed kind of a compliment from one of our professors who said, you're not the smartest student I've ever had. And I'm thinking, well, that's true. He said, but I think you should go get your PhD because you'd be a wonderful teacher. That was the first time in my life that I ever thought, well, maybe I want to teach. And so I'm like, why would you say that? And he said, because you ask a lot of questions and you like to talk a lot. He said, it makes a great teacher. So I decided to go to try to get my PhD, which thankfully it worked out. And right out of that, started teaching at the University of Richmond, which is where I graduated from. I was 26 years old at the time, so you can imagine how naive I was.
Well, during your opportunity to serve as professor, what would you say have been some of the most rewarding things that you've experienced in that role?
To your office or into a classroom or into your home or wherever that might be, and they're there to be taught. It's a tremendous responsibility. We used to make fun and talk about we're molding minds, but in reality, that's true. So you do have a tremendous responsibility because of the impact that you're going to have. It's like being a coach. very similar. You will impact them possibly for life, hopefully full of positive, but sometimes it's not. But to have them, have students be a part of your teaching and learning over time, and then after that's done, to have them come back and say something about how much they appreciated what they learned, especially if they're talking about life lessons more than just specifics. That's probably the most rewarding thing that you can hear.
Mhm. Wow. And I think about, you had the opportunity, obviously, to enter very young as a professor at 26. I have 2 children myself in college right now, and there's not a large age gap between their age and you as a beginning professor. Um, as you've gone through that journey, and I think about other people that maybe have been in the business world and who have the knowledge and the experience that you do, but maybe haven't considered that role of being able to pour into each other, into students rather, I should say. I just want to thank you, just to know that there are professors out there with the character and the integrity and understanding the impact they have on this next generation is so valuable to all of us who have students in college. Just thank you on our behalf.
So say it's truly been my pleasure. I mean, God directed all of that. I'm one of those that people would say, can you tell us how you reached the various points in your career and how you made those decisions? And I say, I didn't. God did, and he truly did. So it's been very, very, I've been very blessed to be a part of it and to try to, help other people think independently, not just repeating back what they've heard on social media or maybe from some professor. I think it's one of the best things you can do. So I've been very blessed.
That is so true. That is true. From your perspective, when you see young people coming in and out of your classroom and they're moving from that academic setting and they're going into the working world, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that they face this generation?
That last part is the most important part, this generation. I've been around to see a few, I think, or changes in what students have to be prepared for, I guess, when they leave the security of school. Because all of us, as we went through school, at some point in time, that was like a security blanket in a way, because we always knew what was next. When you leave school, you don't know what's next. So your preparation is pretty important, which is another interesting aspect about teaching and responsibility. But I think today in particular, I say to students that I still talk to quite a few of them about trying to be themselves and not let social media dictate who they're going to be. It plays such a large role on their everything they do in life. Being themselves as opposed to following all the time, whether it be in the workspace or in a personal life, the decisions they make with other individuals about what they're going to do and not do. It's difficult, to be more difficult, I think, today to be yourself than it ever has been, because of how many different types of individuals from different modes of information are pouring into their lives. Information overload has been a word we've used for many, many years. It's never been more true than it is today. So I think another thing that they really ought to consider is trying to focus on their strengths while at the same time admitting that they have weaknesses and trying to work on that. I believe, especially with the students I was able to work with who are extremely bright and have a lot of opportunities, I think they have a tendency to believe that they have to have all the answers all the time. And if they don't, in some way that's a weakness, as opposed to seeing it as a chance to learn and get better at something. There's a tremendous, I think, fear of perceived failure, which doesn't allow them to take the kind of risk that maybe some of us in the past, took, because we didn't see the downside as much as they might perceive it to be today.
That's fascinating that you say that fear of failure is stronger now than ever before. If you had a class of seniors getting ready to go out into the workplace, or maybe you have to start before their senior year, what would you recommend so that that fear of failure from either an academic perspective or a different perspective, how can they maybe overcome that as they enter the workforce?
Well, I like that, the idea of telling someone to be themselves. I think they hear that a lot, but really, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Um, they are, when they are ready to go into the workforce or leaving school and then hopefully into the workforce, they're prepared.
Mhm.
They've gone through quite a bit. They've had a lot of, even though they're young at that point, 21, 22, if we're talking about university educated, they've gone through a lot of life, lessons already, and they have a lot to offer.
Mhm.
So, if they do fail at something, it should be because they're taking a risk. They're trying to do something they're not totally comfortable with, and that's okay, because that's how they learn, and that's how you move forward, and that's how they've always done that for all of their life at this point. So you don't want to change that now, because I used to talk about it. It's something I said to my daughter when she was quite young. She used to write down a list of, I don't know, quotes that she said I made up. I didn't even know this, but she said one of the ones that really, stood out to her is that you told her when I was trying to get her to think for herself and not just listen to her peers. And what I told my students, if all you know is what someone tells you, then eventually you're just going to be going in the same circle all the time.
Mhm.
So you have to step out and learn something on your own. And oftentimes that's done through attempting things that you're not comfortable with. And some of that might lead to it not working out quite as well as you would hope that it would have. And that's okay, because you're really gaining by that. And so you step back and go, okay, really? So, well, yeah, because you do have a lot to offer. You do have a lot that some people will deem valuable to them, their organization, whatever they might be doing. So never forget that. You might not be in the right spot to really show that at any given time, but you do have significant value. It's a two-way street with whomever you're working with.
And maybe just for a minute, let me also shift perspectives. As someone who also has been an entrepreneur and had employees that you have hired and had to deal with people coming in, what would you say maybe to that established businesswoman or businessman out there as they're bringing new hires or younger employees into their workspace? Um, what would be your recommendation for them to have the most effective, most um, productiveness out of those new employees?
Hmm. So that's really a hiring kind of a question, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of people that you might bring into your workspace, and what your expectations might be of them. I think the real backdrop to answering that question would be your employees already, people that you already have in your organization, and how they view the needs of the organization, and the types of people that they want to have there. So I think there's a lot of needed training for people that you already have as employees, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how they view themselves, how they view the workplace that they are part of, and what that workplace expects of them, and of new people coming in. So if they can't explain that clearly, as it relates to themselves, I don't think there's any way they can necessarily make good hires, because they oftentimes would there'd be a hodgepodge. There'd be a lot of luck going on, and that's not what you want. You hate to hire people that are not the proper fit. But so I think you have to really have those characteristics defined well, and then have good questions to ask, potential candidates to see if they would fit in, to that. One of the ones I often like, I get this, as it relates to hiring, especially in a faith-based, kind of a company that's led by believers. How do you try to figure out whether or not a person is positive towards that? Because in today's litigant society, you can't ask specific questions,
Right.
about faith or a lot of other things actually. So also you just, try to figure out, questions that causes someone else to have that conversation with you, such as what are you and or your family, what do you all like to do on weekends? Well, if that person is a person of faith and they attend church or something like that, they're probably going to say something about that's what they do on Sunday mornings.
Mm-hmm.
And that generates a conversation. Now you can start talking about it. Asking people what they read.
Mm-hmm.
What types of things do they like to read? Those are all safe questions and certainly allowable. It starts to tell you something about somebody's personality. But I think in the context of a lot of companies, communication is really key to success, and therefore people that you hire need to show that kind of a skill set immediately in that conversation. And I think they should look for individuals that recognize that they have something to offer. They're not overly confident in that in a negative sense, but it's when you're interviewing someone, they should also be interviewing you.
Right.
Because they have something to offer, and they don't want to waste their time with an organization that's not going to be a good fit for them as well.
I love what you said in terms of, as someone who is hiring, you have to know what you value as an organization and what you value in your employees, really have a culture that is able to be communicated among your current employees, let alone any new hires. And that is something that I think probably most of the people who are in the world of business or even nonprofits or ministry, we know that academically, but sometimes whatever that bottom line is, it takes precedence, and we make the urgent more come to the point more than the important. So I think that's a great reminder to everyone in our audience that is in a place of influence and is bringing people on board, is to really pause and make sure that you understand what really is the non-negotiables of our company or our nonprofit, and how are we able to replicate that to create a culture that represents what we want. So you're right. You kind of put the cart before the horse if you're just worried about that new employee. You have to make sure your existing employees really understand the value of that as well.
So that's a very important point to starting a business as well. It's one I think that a lot of people overlook or assume it'll happen simply because you're a certain kind of person, so your company's going to be that way, and that is not the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that really is a great lead in to my next question for you. I think, and I don't have statistics on this, you might have statistics on this, but certainly the culture is so different now in terms of how many people are starting up their own small businesses and how many millennials are doing that as well. What would you say are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions that young people have, whether it be to start up a business or to enter the workplace?
Those are two very different things, because most people are, I think most people are designed to enter the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I think very few people are designed to start a business. And so the characteristics, I mean, there are obviously overlapping characteristics there, but there are certain ones I think that if you want to start a business are very, very different. A lot of people, I think, feel if you ask them about what does it take to start a business, and what are some of those characteristics, and you can read a lot of articles, on that subject, and I think most of them are all the same. They talk about, it takes passion. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. You have to be willing to work hard. It has to be one of the most important things, to you, and you got to make sure you have help, etc. Well, got to have the right finances. Okay. Well, the thing is, you ask yourself the question, anyone else starting a business, who's not going to be doing that? I mean, pretty much everybody's they're going to have those characteristics. So you haven't done anything to differentiate yourself whatsoever, whether it be entering the workforce or starting a business. And what you have to remember, it's competitive. Whether you're in the workforce you know, or try to start a business, or you're in business, you're in competition. And one of the things that someone is trying to do, besides building their own business, is one of the ways to do that is to take business away from you. That's just the nature of competition. And it's not a bad thing. Matter of fact, it requires us, if you have a business that's doing well, or you're in a job and you're doing well, it requires you to stay on top of things, because you will go backwards, and people will exceed your capabilities, and or they will do a better job in their business, which customers will then see that and maybe switch. So that's always the case. I think that's what makes capitalism, so strong, is that if you don't continue to do well, continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to satisfy your customer even better and better, somebody else will be able to take your place. And I think as a business owner, if you find that to be scary, somewhat daunting, then you're probably not going to be a good business owner. I think you embrace that kind of challenge. You look forward to it. You like being in that arena. And I think a lot of people overlook that, and then they overlook the basics of what it takes to, create a successful business. And that's not a characteristic like that, But I talk to a lot of aspiring business owners, and I hate to tell you how many of them left my office crying because I burst their bubble, because they just weren't either cut out for it. In my opinion, it was just simply my opinion, or they weren't ready, based on their inability to answer certain questions.
Well, I think I asked a pretty poor question. I think they call it in the coaching world, I just stacked a question. So I asked you two different things at the same time. But honestly, your answer is actually very insightful, because I think that might be one of the misconceptions is, well, I'll either go get a job, or in this generation, I'll start something. That tends to be much more common, I think, in this current climate than maybe in previous generations. So what you just pointed out is actually very important. There is a huge difference between the two, not to be mistaken. So,
and you shouldn't. It's like, I thought I was, going to be a really good athlete, and end up being a pro. Well, that's not how God made it.
There you go.
So you got to be okay with that. We're not all cut out to do the same things. We're all important, but we need to understand what it takes to be successful, or whatever it is we're deciding we want to spend a lot of time at. And that goes for just having a job of some sort with a different organization, because that leads to a lot of happiness.
Harold, there's so many other things that I want to get to, and I know you have been gracious to do a part 2, so we will pick up with some other questions in our next segment. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we ask and get your wisdom on before we leave today is, for somebody who's entering the workforce for the first time, they may not realize it, but they will very quickly, that 60 to 70% of their waking time is going to be spent in their job, in their workplace. And for someone who is a person of faith, walking into a sphere where that's not always politically correct, it's not always welcome, what would you give as advice to somebody of how they can live out their faith in the marketplace?
Yeah, I love that question. I've had a lot of students that knew I was a believer come in and ask that question, worried that they were getting ready, knowing they were getting ready to go into a situation that might not be supportive in the way they might think they'd like it to be supportive. But biblically, we're told that as believers we have a new nature. So I think that what I tell people is, let it be natural. It is your nature, to be a believer. It is your nature to have the characteristics God gave you, to be His image. And I try to tell people, don't force it, and don't be afraid of it. Either one. Yeah. Don't force it, and don't fear it, because it works. And you need to this is, I think, important. We often somehow forget this. We need to leave room for the Holy Spirit as well.
Right.
Yeah, we're not placed in a situation to do it all by ourselves, and they didn't hire us for that purpose.
Right.
So okay, I'm okay with that. But I am who I am, and that's important to me. But if I don't force that or fear that, people will know it. And because of that, at some point, people are going to ask questions. And really, that's all you want.
Right.
You want them to ask a question. And then that starts the conversation.
Wow.
Very comfortable, I think.
Yeah, that is, sometimes you have a way of just making that so simple. It's almost like those two guardrails. You don't fear it, and you don't force it, and that's somewhere in the middle. That's where the Lord will give you those opportunities in the appropriate time. So I think that's a great word for us to end on. That's a great word for anybody. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the marketplace. That's a good image for us to just kind of have those guardrails in place. So Dr. Babb, thank you so much for coming and joining us. It has been just my honor to learn from you and to interview you. I know that so many people have benefited from you in the classroom over the years. Thank you for allowing all of us through leadership conversations to learn from you as well.
Appreciate your kind words.
All right. Well, if you would like any information on Lead Like Jesus, we want to encourage you to go to leadlikejesus.com, and also encourage you to come back and for part 2, as I have an opportunity to ask Dr. Babb a few more questions on his role as a businessman and as a believer in the workplace. Until then, we'll see you next time.